There's no question as to the value of paddock trees. They not only add carbon to the soil, increase the biodiversity and manage pests, look after salt levels, but they also provide enormous benefit to our livestock, providing shelter from harsh climates, increasing lambing and calving percentages. We have to look after them, but there are some issues with trees in paddocks. Today is all about managing our existing paddock trees and rethinking the value of understory species in our paddock grazing management. Even really old trees in your paddock, like this red box that's probably a couple of 100 years old, are not suited to the pressures that modern grazing place on them. The compaction around the root zone from the livestock, the urine, the faeces, the extra nutrient and the insect pressure that brings all play a part in the decline of these paddock trees. Not only that, we also don't have the animals that used to curate and look after these trees, like possums, that require a mid-story and a corridor to travel from tree to tree. So for the landholder, there's big questions about how to manage your remnant vegetation and opportune regrowth to maximise your biodiversity, lower your pest pressure and get your farming land back on an even keel. So let's go and talk to Tim Lee now about his plans for this beautiful property that's been spelled from grazing for a couple of years and see what he wants to do to protect some of the native vegetation that's sprung up. So Tim, this is the next issue that you have. You've got an opportunity here with some recently regrown trees.
We've had 2 really exceptional years, and these trees, I call them, you get trees for free every once in a while with a bumper season. But the issue is, how do you protect them from stock pressure? And you can see these have been quite hammered, these little regrowth red gums. So I'd love to be able to maintain them and get them to flourish. But how do we go about it? So let's have a look.
So Tim, you've got some free trees here in your paddock. You've had 2 really good wet summers, and because you've just bought the property, you've had relatively low grazing pressure for a year. And you're wanting to capitalise on this, but we can already see that just having the cattle in this paddock for a couple of weeks has done a lot of damage to these trees.
They really destroy it. Instead of a single stem, you get these multiple branches and a pretty ugly little tree that's not a great result. You really want to be able to check these little saplings and get them into being good, useful paddock trees.
And I suppose my concern with fencing off an area like this is, as soon as you take the grazing away from this area, you're going to start getting weed species pop up, you're going to have a management issue, you're going to have fire risk. So there's a lot of questions about managing a little copse of trees like this that give you so much biological potential and add so much to your farm ecosystem. But you've got to do it in the right way, don't you?
I think you really need to fence it off securely, but have a gateway so that you can put stock in. The grazing pressure is okay. You need some grazing to keep that fire risk down, keep the weeds down, and just keep that nutrient cycle going also, so the trees don't stagnate, and all the things that you often see in beautiful lines of trees, but they struggle a bit because there's too much competition from other grasses. We've had 2 terrific seasons here. A lot of these trees have only come up because there hasn't been much grazing pressure here in 2 years. With a good season, something for free is always great, but how do you protect it?
So we've got Carmen from Maffra and District Landcare available today, and it's a really good idea to talk to a landcare group in the area, because there's a range of experiences from various different landholders when they're giving you advice that's sort of localised. Well, let's go and talk to Carmen and find out what her suggestions are.
She'll know.
Carmen, g'day, how are you?
G'day.
Thanks very much for your time today.
No worries.
You're involved in running the local landcare group, and you've had a fair bit of experience in looking after plants like this. Now, many people would look at this and think it's a bit of an ugly mess, but it's a pretty significant little bush, isn't it? Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, little bushes like this are really valuable in the environment. We've got this overstory of trees behind us, and most people, when they think of landcare, they think landcare is all about planting trees, it's just as important, everything, the tiny little forbs at the bottom here, the grasses, the prickly bushes, up to the big trees, every layer is extremely important for biodiversity. Where a little bird can go in and hide and be protected from the big eagles and hawks and magpies, Indian miners, anything that's going to chase it.
There's a fantastic relationship between these plants, the wasps that live on them, and brown beetle, which is a big problem for grazing paddocks. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the host to probably a number of wasps. Wasps in particular help to protect the canopy trees, the big old trees behind us, because it will predate and attack the beetles that attack those trees, attack the new vegetation, the fresh young shoots on those trees.
When these little guys disappear, the big trees start to die.
Yeah, that's right.
Tim has taken on this property that hasn't been grazed for a while, and he's really keen to maintain some of this vegetation that's coming back, but maintain it in a way that adds value to his grazing system, because he's still running a business. He's still got a grazing property.
Yes.
So we're going to look at a couple of suggestions that you have that anyone can put into place easily, and a few products that can be used intelligently to do that. The first thing is establishing some shelter belts. Now they're going to obviously increase our lambing potential and our calving potential, provide shelter for stock, things like that. What do you suggest for that?
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's a bit like when you buy a house. It's really good before you make any changes is to get an understanding of what you've got and what the pros and cons are of the place you're in. So it's no different on a farm. Starting to understand the aspect. At the moment we're getting whacked by a southwesterly breeze, so from a production point of view, as you say, Tim the farmer needs to be able to generate income off the place. What's going to limit his production here? Well, you know, if he's a sheep farmer and he's got a mob of sheep that have just been shorn, you'd be wanting to give them protection from the southwesterly, the prevailing wind. Also too, if you were looking at trying to provide shade for your cattle, that's a big thing in dairy herds these days. They're starting to understand just how it's not just the extreme temperatures. You know, they talk about the cattle losses when you get the days of 43 degrees day after day. There's big losses in dairy herds there, but we know that production starts to drop once the temperature hits 26 degrees. So just by being able to provide more shade on the property.
So you're recommending that the minimum width of a tree shelter belt should be about 12 metres. That is the current Landcare recommendation.
Yeah.
And we want to run that down a fence line, an existing fence line. And we want to actually layer the trees in that shelter belt, which is a really interesting idea also. We don't want all the same variety of tree, and we want early bolters and we want late bolters. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the idea that you don't want to over-engineer it. Nature is random. We do a lot of direct seeding with Landcare, and you know, a lot of farmers will say, "Oh, I want to do this. I don't want too much of this species or that species." But generally, with direct seeding, you throw in a mix of, you know, with the preferred species. But nature will do her own thing, and she'll throw up what is going to be the strongest. You know, you'll see the acacias come up first because they're the colonisers. They get the ground ready for the other species. They'll fix the nitrogen and just change the soil conditions.
One little tip I did hear just today was put your acacias in the middle, because they've got the weaker root system, and have your slower developing, stronger root system trees on the outside, and that way your fences will get caned a lot less.
Yeah, well, that's right.
That's
Acacias, acacias, they come up early and then they do senesce, they die off, after say 10 years or so, and so are notorious for dropping branches. So by avoiding having them when you're planting or seeding, avoid having them on the outside rows. That's one way of not having fences short out. We also do encourage, if it's possible, to do fencing in the middle of paddocks. You know, don't just hug the fence lines.
So Carmen, there's a couple of plans here today with Tim's property. We're going to look after some of these unique little understory plants in the paddock. We're going to then try and introduce a shelter belt along an existing fence line to provide a little bit more shelter.
So I think the priority is Tim wants to bring in cattle to graze. He's got cattle on agistment. So it's really important to protect what is identified as special little species. So there's a grass tree, there's this gorgeous little prickly acacia that by just putting a structure, a fencing structure around these to protect them as the cattle come through and just crash graze the place, that's a really good short-term measure. And then the longer-term measure is to start to establish some shelter belts that will connect up the patches of vegetation.
Well, Tim, I'm really excited. Now's the time when we start going on your projects. Carmen's had some fantastic ideas and given us some great advice, obviously, that you're already putting into practice. And this is an example of some early work that you've been doing to try and look after some of these prickly acacias here. And you've really just come across with some barbed wire and some steel posts.
It was pretty hurried. I was in a rush and just said, I'm about to get cattle in here. I need something. So, look, it's just a bit of a deterrent, but really...
But hey, it's worked.
It's worked. It stopped them from that grazing pressure, and it's big because there's a smaller version of that over there. So really...
Well, I've got a product to try out with you today. It's a new tree guard from White's that is actually rigid and will actually stand almost on its own.
Okay.
And it comes up to 6 feet in height.
Perfect.
So it's going to stop this pressure of the cattle leaning over. You can see where they've actually leant over the top even of the barb. Yep. And hopefully it'll take a little bit of pressure off these trees and shrubs out in the middle of the paddock.
As I say, this was temporary, so anything more permanent, most welcome.
Let's go and have a look at it and try it out.
Perfect.
So Tim, this is what we've got. We've got these prefabricated tree guards from White's, and I reckon they might be a nice, neat, elegant, fast solution for you. Because even though you play around with old stuff, it takes time. So if you spend a little bit of money on something that is purpose-built for the job and use it straight off, it's quicker, faster, and it lasts longer.
Sounds good.
Let's give them a go. All right, Tim, so you've got a grass tree here that's been grazed down a bit.
It's a dwarf grass tree, and they're quite rare, and it's on the pasture, strangely. But you can see it's been hit, that tribulus seed pod, it's been chewed down. So
this is going to disappear pretty quick if we don't look after it. In fact, it's in the process of being disappeared right now.
And that's what causes this stuff. So.
Yeah. So, all right, well, let's give this tree guard a bit of a workout. Plonk it over the top, put a couple of steel posts in, and then we'll tie it to the steel posts with some tie wire. Job's done. No cow's going to get over the top of that.
No, indeed.
How you going, darling? You want some of this, do you? Hey? Once we worked out where we wanted the tree guard, I quickly put it to one side and hammered in the steel posts so that they were on the inside of the finished tree guard. Just one spot less for cattle to catch themselves on. This thing's not going anywhere, and all it takes is a little bit of tie wire to finish the job. Leave your dags pointing inwards, and there's nothing for the cattle to hurt themselves on. Don't forget to also attach the steel posts using a standard twitch. We spent the rest of the afternoon installing tree guards around really important specimens that we wanted to protect in the paddock. This was nice, easy work to enjoy a sunset by. The following morning we had plans to start the fence for the new tree line to create a shelter belt not only for the livestock but also for the native animals and protect some trees by providing some biodiversity around their base. I don't know about you, but I reckon this isn't a bad office, eh? Now we've got the paddock trees guarded, it's time to work on the shelter belt for building a good 12-metre corridor of native vegetation to act as a shelter from sun and wind. For this, we're going to be using the stock post end assemblies. Really solid 90mm end assembly post with a stay, threaded rod and plate. Makes the job of building your end assembly easier than ever before. As well as laying out the two end assemblies, we also ran out the steel posts for the intermediates at a 4 metre spacing. We worked up a bit of an appetite for dinner that way, and the reality was neither one of us wanted to leave the paddock. It was such a beautiful sunset. What a great way to spend your afternoon. Having everything ready to go when Jared, Tim's brother, arrived with the post driver also meant that we were right to start work straight away. These holes up with the cider posts and the fence line, and then when we put it in, our stay post is not offset and screwing it around. That's the only trick with these posts. Righto. We then went about installing the two end posts 12 metres off the existing fence line, and the posts went in like a knife through hot butter with the beautiful Munro post driver. Honestly, within 10 minutes we were down the other end of the fence with both end assembly posts driven, and we were ready to set up the stay posts. There's not much to it really, just insert the pointy bits in the round bits and put the platy bit in the shiny bit. Insert the threaded rod from the stay end, side each stay plate in against the other post at the other end of the fence, or any siding posts that you've got in the middle of the fence for longer runs. And then simply do up the nut at the other end. I do suggest doing it up tight with a spanner. And you're all set and you're all done. How easy is that? Now we're going to run out our ground wire. I'm using 2.5mm high tensile because once we've run our ground wire we can actually use it as part of the fence. Our ground wire is going to run between the two end assemblies we've just installed so that all of our steels are nicely in line. When we're loading our wire spinner, don't forget, look at the label and have the label pointing the right way round, and then you won't be loading your spinner upside down and the wire won't tangle. Always start with the end of wire that has the label on it. I'm using a high quality Walters wire spinner. This is a professional model, so loading it is super easy. All I have to do is slot it in place and we're ready to go. One little trick when you're wrapping wire around these steel end posts, don't just go around once. If you go around twice, you'll actually get a friction wrap on the post and it'll be more likely to stay in place. We're going to run the ground wire out now, connect to the other fence post, and then ram in our steels. Once we got the ground wire strained up and tied off at the other end, we could get on to what is for me probably the most satisfying part of any fencing job, and that's punching in the intermediate posts and seeing it rise up out of the ground and come to life. I can't think of anything better, particularly when this work enhances the beautiful natural environment of this farm here at Braigalong. It is just such a spectacular place, and it's great to see such care being taken to see it last into the future. Well, Tim, that's the bulk of the work done. We've got our 5 wires up, we've got our end assemblies in place, and you now have your 12-metre laneway so that you can do your tree planting. Yep. So hopefully that sets you on your way. I've got a few things for you in the old dilly bag before you go.
Fantastic. It's like speech night. Every kid gets a prize. Thank you.
Exactly. Well, I can't do this without sponsors, and we've got some fantastic products for you. So I don't know if you've ever used Davo's fencing clips.
I've heard of them. I know of them, but I haven't used them. But
they're a really good product, particularly if you're working with these old wooden posts where the staples can tend to fall out as they crack. You find these guys will hold on very, very well.
Yeah, well.
And they're really easy to put in. I reckon your wife Maria will have a heap of fun with these.
Righto. Yeah.
There's some clips here because the job's not quite done. We've still got to clip into most of these steel posts.
Yeah, they do a neat job, the clips.
And I've got some spiral fast for you in case you need to join some plain wire in the future. They're a really handy product, really, really strong.
Fantastic.
So, thanks for having us out, mate.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate the time that you took.
No, it's been
a real catching up with Landcare was fantastic.
Yeah, likewise.
And guys, if you ever have a look at your paddocks and you think, how can I get more productivity out of them? Think about the trees. As usual guys, if you liked this video today, don't forget, hit the little subscribe button, give it a thumbs up, and there's plenty more content and product reviews on timthompson.ag. Oh yeah, you should wear hearing protection.